But obviously, you know, keep it brief, keep it to the point, and we'll try and facilitate that as well. We've got the ability to do it.
Absolutely. We're now live on YouTube as well. It worked.
We'll welcome everybody again. We've now got a good attendance in the room. Let me try and set the scene. Back a couple of months ago, I was in a field in France, and Colin came up to me and well, admitted he was shortly to become the new editor of AeroModeller. So I sort of, in amongst flying and that, posed the idea of Colin kicking off our series of sessions in the air tonight. Reminded him that Andrew Boddington actually started the whole thing off for us, number one. So Colin has kindly come on board. It should be an interesting session. I think he's going to do a little presentation and then plenty of Q&As all about AeroModeller. You know, for those who know Colin, that's good. Others, Colin will obviously introduce himself to everybody. But I think we welcome his. I think it's a brave stance to come on and listen to what people would like to read and see in the AeroModeller, and I hope everybody can be constructive and give as much of their thoughts to it as and comments as possible. So, Colin, welcome, and without further ado, let you kick off and have a chat to everybody.
Thank you, Mark.
Can you hear us all right?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, got you fine. We've got a share screen here. Wonderful. Thank you.
You sure you see one screen?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, good evening, everybody. My name's Colin Sharman, and as Mark mentioned, I'm the new editor of AeroModeller magazine. A quick background to that is that I think it was back in May that I was reading AeroModeller and read to my amazement that the beloved editor Andrew Boddington, who'd been in the chair for 10 years, was wishing to retire and was inviting applications for the editor's chair. And I thought, good Lord, that's remarkable. And cut a long story short, due to a convenient combination of circumstances, I thought it would be interesting to apply. I didn't really think I would be with much of a chance of actually becoming a new editor, but I thought it'd be interesting to at least apply. And then to my utter astonishment, a couple of months later, I discovered I was the new editor. So it's been an interesting journey for the last few months. So I've entitled this presentation, and I'll try and keep the presentation fairly short because I'd like to keep this whole session as interactive as possible, as walking in the footsteps of giants. And what I mean by that is that I'm very aware that in the past there's been some very legendary names from the history of aeromodeling who have sat in the editor's chair of AeroModeller. And I find it very humbling to be the latest in that very long line of editors. So I'm going to do a quick introduction. I'll give you a brief summary of what AeroModeller is currently about and what we cover. And then I'd like to open it to a discussion on what you would like to see in AeroModeller, what you like about AeroModeller, what you don't like about AeroModeller. If you're a current customer or subscriber, that is particularly relevant to you as to what you do like, what you don't like. And if you're an ex-customer or an ex-subscriber, what can we do to tempt you back? So as mentioned, I'm aware of some of the greatest legends having been sat in the editor's chair in AeroModeller. And I'm thinking of people like C.S. Rushbrook, Ron Moulton, Peter Freebury, Martin Cowley, and of course, for the last 10 years, Andrew Boddington. The photo on the bottom right there is a symbolic handover of AeroModeller from Andrew to myself at a recent event at Old Warden, a Festival of Flight event organised by Model Air, where we had a photo opportunity to symbolically hand over the magazine from Andrew to myself. Very, very quick bit of background. AeroModeller was first launched in 1935. In fact, just before this session started, Mark was proudly showing me his copy of the first ever issue from November 35. One of the earliest ones I've got is November 1940, and I've got a November 39 as well. So my collection goes back almost to the beginning, and it numbers quite a few hundred copies these days. My background is that I've been an AeroModeller from the age of 9 or 10. So not to give too much away, but that's about 60 years now, just over 60 years. And my first model was a keelcraft Dolphin, which I enthusiastically built at that age. I was very lucky to live on the northern edge of Cardiff, where there was a 1,000-foot high slope right behind where I lived. So I had a ready-made slope to try free flight slope soaring. Tried trimming it in a field at the top of the slope and then actually flying it down the slope. Sadly, I no longer have it, but there is a famous family photograph of me launching this this Dolphin off the slope, photographed from behind, and you can see fairly clearly, even in an old black and white photo, that the tailplane, which was a flat built-up structure, has got bad warps on both sides. It actually looks more like a propeller than a tailplane, but still, somehow or other, the model actually flew to some extent. And that's where it all started. From there, I got more and more involved. I built most of the keelcraft, Veron and Mercury kits, particularly the gliders. I always had a particular interest in gliders right from the very beginning. And over the years, I've also had a involvement in RC slope soaring, thermal soaring, dabbled for a short while in RC scale gliders, but they got very complex and expensive, and occasionally control line flying. So I would never claim to be an expert on all forms of the hobby, but certainly have an interest in most forms of the hobby. And my intention for AeroModeller going forward is that, and I made this very clear at the interview with the publisher and with Andrew, is evolution rather than revolution. So I'm very aware that Andrew Boddington has done a brilliant job over the last 10 years to keep the magazine vibrant, keep it relevant, and to keep it alive in an ever challenging, more challenging environment. So I don't wish to throw all that away overnight. So I will be introducing some changes, but as I say, in an evolutionary manner rather than a wholesale revolutionary manner. So what do we cover today? We basically cover control line, free flight, indoor, and radio assist, to put it very broadly. We do try to aim for a balance of articles. So we include reports on events, both major and minor, major championships, and some contest reports where they are particularly relevant and important international contests. At the other end of the scale, we have articles on beginners guides. We do free plans most months. We try to cover sports models and also things like engine reviews and some very useful and informative how-to articles as well. And from time to time, we do book reviews. In fact, the December issue has a copious article on about a dozen new books being reviewed. And we also sponsor some events as well. So we like to think that we have an active participation in the hobby in most branches of the hobby, even though it's a very, very wide-ranging hobby these days. What we are careful about is not to try and tread on the toes of other magazines and other publications or other disciplines. So to that extent, we're very aware that there's a very successful and comprehensive magazine dedicated to radio flyers and RCM&E, also been going for very many years. I would also careful not to try and overlap too much with SAM 35 and the SAM 1066 vintage organizations. So we try not to duplicate or triplicate where possible. So what AeroModeller is currently, this month, for example, the November 2023 issue, we have reports from the Free Flight World Championships, which Mark was a member of the British team held in France in August. I went there to catch up and get up to date with what the Free Flight World Champs looks like these days, and to also to write the report for AeroModeller. In this current issue, we also have copious reports from the Control Line European Championships as well. So I like to think we've got a pretty broad coverage there. We also have some free flight scale reports. We have the latest in the series of Stuart Marsden's Beginner Series. And we have an engine review on the absolutely intriguing looking Redfin Blue Streak. And then in How To, we have an article this month on repairing damaged tissue, which I wish I'd read about 60 years ago, would have been really helpful. And we have a free plan. We have free plans most months, not every month, but most months. And certainly for the sports flyers and the indoor scale flyers and so on, those can be particularly interesting. So here's the first page of the article on the free flight world champs. And the more eagle-eyed amongst you will spot Mark Benz proudly holding the Union Jack at the front of the Union, the GB team there.
Yeah, we had to pinch a twig for that, or a stick for that,
Yes.
because they didn't actually give us a pole. If you remember, there was no pole to hold the flag, so it's a little bit squiffy. But there we go.
The true British improvisation, yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, we also have articles this month on the European Control Line Championships, so covering the full gamut there from speed, combat, team race, and aerobatics. So again, hopefully, and also written by partly written by competitors from that event as well. So what I really want to get onto is what you, the audience out there, really think, and what would you like to see in AeroModeller? Do you like the balance of articles that we currently have? I'd be very interested to hear from you in what you think we do well, and what you like about AeroModeller, but also what don't we do well, in your opinions? What don't we cover that you would like us to cover? I've had some written questions, which I'll get to in a few minutes, but some of the topics that I'm currently sort of juggling with in terms of what to introduce to broaden the scope of AeroModeller is things like articles on new technologies, new materials, new techniques, and also perhaps some new regular columns. In fact, Pete Fardell, the UK scale flyer, is actually kicking off a new regular scale column from next month, taking over from the column that Bill Dennis wrote for many, many years. And also I'd like to expand on that as well. There's been some conversation in the last week or so with some of the control line guys about doing a regular control line speed and control line techniques and materials series of articles. So I'm very, very open to those kinds of suggestions. I'm also aware that AeroModeller has a particularly challenging social media presence. I mean, in the past, I know that Andrew's been absolutely occupied full time with the print version of the magazine, and rightly so. And the social media presence isn't what it could be. So I'm not going to be able to promise to revolutionize that overnight, but slowly but surely. I'm very much hopeful that over time we will see a bit more of an active social media presence from AeroModeller. And maybe there may even be one or two volunteers who are willing to help out with that.
Got a question for you.
All right.
If I may, Colin. We'll start off on a couple.
Yeah.
One of them I just spotted here. Sorry, Alexander Malcolm. He asked, where can you buy the AeroModeller? As a few shops keep it on the shelf. And what are the subscription rates?
Well, AeroModeller you can buy it in WH Smith's in the UK. I'm not sure about the equivalent to WH Smith in Europe and Canada and the US. I can find out, but I'm not certain off the top of my head. But certainly it's available every month in WH Smith's. It's published on the third Thursday of the month, so it's normally in WH Smith's that third Thursday or the first Friday. If you buy a copy off the shelf, it's in the UK it's £6.99 a copy, and it's something like £130 a year to subscribe to it. And if you do subscribe, most of the time there is a package of goodies on offer as well, usually from Deluxe Materials, a very useful set of adhesives and materials from Deluxe Materials that you'll actually get for becoming a subscriber. So hopefully that's an incentive to become a subscriber.
Brilliant. Thank you. I'll cover one more, and then I'll let you carry on. And then it was just Lee Richardson. I've seen Lee on Facebook, and he's apart from being a wonderful photographer, he's a wonderful builder and flyer as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Would the return of Vintage Corner be welcomed? He's asking the question, I guess, is the point. So let's put it out there. This is the whole point of this evening, I think. Really,
That's an interesting point, Lee. Basically, I would say yes, it would be interesting. My only slight proviso is to be a little bit wary of not treading on the toes of SAM 35 too much and SAM 1066. But I'm aware there used to be a Vintage Corner that ran for many years, and we could certainly look at some ideas and some thoughts about bringing that back. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. I'll let you crack on. Sorry, Colin, I interrupted you there with a couple of questions, but
That's okay. Fire away.
Feel free. I mean, you've got some questions I know had come in as well. So,
okay. So yeah, as I was saying, I'd be interested to hear from people who are current customers and readers of AeroModeller as to what you like, what you don't like, and what you would like to see that isn't in the magazine currently. I went through some of the examples there, and then also on the other side of the coin, if you used to be an AeroModeller reader or customer, and for whatever reason you stopped buying it and stopped reading it some time ago, what are the broad or general reasons behind that? Was it because you didn't find it relevant to you, didn't find it interesting, didn't like it, or or did you find it too expensive, or whatever it might be? I'd be interested in feedback from ex-customers who may have out of curiosity dialed into this this webcast or connected to this webcast. So once again, all the feedback and all the thoughts and suggestions will be very, very welcome. You can also contact me by email pretty much any time. It's editor@aeromodeller.com. So fire away with the questions, and also feel free to email at any time.
Yeah, Charlie Jeffries asks, may we please have more outdoor free flight sports and scale models, especially new designs, not just revived old designs, much appreciated as they are. That was so that was what Charlie was saying. So I think it's probably less regurgitated older models and some fresh ones, which
well, that's a very good point. Yeah. In terms of the free plans, quite a few of the free plans that have appeared in AeroModeller over the last few years have been rehashes of much older designs from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and that has its place. I mean, that is relevant to a lot of people. But I do like the idea. I think having fresher and more up to date or more current free flight sports and scale models, all for it, certainly. Yeah. And if anyone fancies writing an article or submitting an article, then please get in touch.
I think. Sorry, Barry, go on.
Yeah, I was going to say, Colin, I've been reading AeroModeller since about 1973, sometime like that, and certainly you can see that it's changed. And some guys, I mean, Martin Dilly's asked some questions that we're going to bring up shortly.
Yeah.
Certainly people like Martin and myself would certainly sort of hark back to those sort of glory days, but we have to remember that the hobby's changed. The other thing is everyone's asking you to do something different. You can see all the questions. It's very difficult to please everyone all of the time.
Yeah.
So having said that, I did like AeroModeller where it was a real Bible for good technical content, coupled with interesting other subjects as well. So from my side, I would certainly like to see good, well-written technical articles that were transferable. And so this is the important thing, that are transferable to other parts of the hobby. So for example, something that may be to do with finishing in a certain area, you might be able to use that on another kind of model or a engineering technique or whatever. So that's, for me, is important. Transferable knowledge, good articles. That's what I would like to see from the magazine.
And I think that's a very good point, Barry. In fact, a few people have mentioned that to me already, or something very similar, including one of the questions from Martin Dilly. I'm absolutely all for that. I think one of the challenges we have with AeroModeller is it has this amazing history. It does go back all the way back to 1935, but also we have to look forward as well. So I think, to keep the magazine relevant and to keep it of interest to people, I think it is important to have a technical content to it. I've already got some thoughts down on paper, and I'll be reaching out to a few people in the coming weeks about doing just that, about writing some hopefully well-written articles on modern materials and bang up-to-date materials, and covering materials would be part of that, certainly. But also thinking in terms of things like carbon fiber techniques, and they can certainly be transferable across a number of different disciplines within aeromodeling. So, overall, certainly, I'm certainly very keen on that, Barry. Yes.
Colin, what's been interesting? It's been an interesting journey for In the Air Tonight, because and I've mentioned to you in a couple of emails, that we've learned that the actual sort of cross-pollination between different disciplines has been far better than we ever thought it would be. We thought if we had a session on scale, only scale people would turn up. If we had one on control line, only control line. That's not the case. It is very much like everybody, the faces are very, very similar, or the names, I should say. The faces, we don't see the faces, but the names are very familiar all the time, and we get a good audience. But I think this cross-pollination of ideas, the fact that Barry will be taking some into pylon racing that he's heard from Free Flight, and Free Flight takes them from pylon racing, and all these different things, that it's very much about what the AeroModeller is about to me. And I think it's interesting. One of the questions that one of the comments here from David, which I'll come on to, is about social media, is about YouTube, is about this sort of, we're all trying to do the same thing. We're all trying to sort of promote aeromodeling. That's it. That's what we do. That's why we set up In the Air Tonight. It's about promoting aeromodeling for all. So David states here, this is David Galler. I'm not a current subscriber, but have my head turned courtesy of the YouTube channel Maxi Fly Art, which in my own opinion effortlessly lays bare the sheer beauty and grace of free flight, specifically in build detail and outdoor flying. Is this the kind of thing AeroModeller contains routinely, and would you consider a dedicated YouTube channel to further showcase the breadth of, and it's just gone, my question's gone there. It's gone.
That was me, Mark. Sorry.
I love it. First day back. Here we go. Breadth of this
the answered questions.
It's fantastic hobby, and being Martin's in the room, it's a hobby and a sport as well. So let's cover that one off. So sorry, that was a bit of a monologue there, but I'll let you come back on that one.
Certainly. In fact, to be absolutely honest with everybody, I was actually waiting for someone to actually raise that very point. Certainly, I already mentioned that I think we do need a much more active social media presence, and in particular a YouTube channel. In fact, I'm just in the very early stages of setting up a YouTube channel dedicated to AeroModeller. Before I took on this job, I retired from a very busy corporate role about 7 years ago, and then got convinced by a friend of mine to go jointly into starting a video business, which we ran for a number of years, and we wound that up earlier this year and the back end of last year. But one of the things we did a lot of with that was YouTube channel. YouTube is absolutely universal these days. I mean, I know that not just for watching videos on every subject you can possibly imagine, and millions of others you can't imagine, but also things like musicians find it as a source of new music these days. It's incredible how all pervasive YouTube is these days. So as I say, yeah, I'm certainly one of my short-term projects is to set up a YouTube channel. In fact, there's an article that's going to be in the January issue, which will come out just before Christmas, which is a how-to article on how to reinforce and toughen tissue by covering an airframe with mylar and then covering it with tissue. And the person who's actually provided that article very, very helpfully also provided a video of the actual preparation of the actual techniques used. So there's literally a video version of the article. So that will be the first video to go up on the YouTube channel, and that will be in the coming few weeks. Certainly, it'll be launched in time for with that edition of the magazine as well. So it'll be a bit kind of baby steps at first. I don't have a massive amount of time spare to devote to things like that. I'm finding the job quite time consuming as it is, but that's no excuse, and I'm absolutely all for having a YouTube channel at the very, very least. I'd also like to see a bit more of an active presence on Facebook and TikTok and Instagram as well. But these things take time.
They do. I'll go through a couple of questions because they're starting to build up. Barry keeps knocking them off the screen for me, but that's absolutely fine. That's fine as well. I'll find them.
It was just the one.
Yeah, this is from Steve Jones. It's a really good question. I'm sure keeping a magazine going in a potential shrinking population of modelers, how do you strike the balance of revenue generating traders versus articles to get interest? Your years, I think many magazines get the balance wrong. Over years, I think many magazines get that wrong. So obviously, I think it's about the amount of sponsorship and adverts as articles.
That's a really good point, actually, and it's something which I've started to take a look at. I mean, right now in AeroModeller, currently in current issues, you'll find if you go through from cover to cover, there's typically 6 to 8 pages of adverts, either full page or part full page adverts. That's an awful lot less than it used to be years ago. Now, there's all kinds of reasons for that. We have things like the internet, we have social media, we have this, that, and the other. There's many different ways that companies get their message out these days. One thing I was doing as part of my sort of preparation for applying for this role was looking through AeroModellers from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And one of the things that really struck me is when you opened the front cover, there was about 12 or 15 pages of adverts before you got to the contents page. That would be a nice challenge to have, but I don't see that happening to that extent any longer. In fact, I don't think hardly any print magazines would be in that enviable position these days. As I say, we do have subscribers, and some of those subscribers also provide some sponsorship of materials and articles from time to time as well. So yeah, it is a challenge. It is a balancing act as well. We physically have we have a limit of 68 pages. So each issue is 68 pages in total of articles, cover, and adverts. That typically breaks down to 6 to 8 pages of adverts, roughly speaking, and about 60 pages of content. Now, I've already asked a question from our publishers. Is that 60 pages at 68 pages flexible, or is it a limit? And the reality of life is at the moment is it's a limit. I would have loved to have added another 20 pages into the November and October AeroModellers to cover the whole of the free flight world champs in one article. I think Andrew was a bit taken aback when I actually sent the article I'd written on the whole of the champs as to how long it was. So that's needed to be broken down into 3 monthly chunks, for example. So yeah, it all comes back to this balancing act.
Yeah.
And I'm certainly open to suggestions and open to feedback on that as well. If people think that that there's adverts which they don't find interesting because they see those companies or products advertised elsewhere, that's a valid comment perhaps. On the other
Colin,
hand, it is a central place to find relevant adverts and products.
yeah, I've just got a very old AeroModeller out here, 1948. It's got less pages than what you've got available. You've got 68 pages.
Yeah.
And I think this has got, well, it's saying that the last page is page 152 and it starts at 97. So it's kind of 55, 56 pages.
Yeah.
And they've got a lot more advertising in there.
Yeah.
You've actually got a lot more real estate to get content into, which is a good thing. I think one of the observations that I see, if I look at this, it's not going to be the greatest thing to do, but they're getting a lot of text on every page. But when we go back, I think now, and one of the questions that's come up is, I can't remember who it was, but the guy wanted the magazine to be easier to read, bigger text. Which goes against that's
an interesting question, actually, an interesting comment. I can understand that, actually. I've got some sort of previous experience with this, in that one of the reasons why I applied for the AeroModeller role in the first place was that a bit over 2 years ago, I volunteered to become the newsletter editor of the Bristol West Club that I'm a member of. And the situation there was that the club secretary, Peter Tribe, had put in an absolutely mammoth effort for well over 20 years in producing the club newsletter as well. And it was clearly becoming more and more of a struggle and a challenge for obvious reasons. So I thought I had a bit of time on my hands. I was now officially retired, and I volunteered to take it on. And actually, partly to my surprise, or largely to my surprise, I've thoroughly enjoyed that journey. I've managed to build up that monthly newsletter to 60, 70, 80 pages most months, and with a pretty wide range of topics, including some full-size aviation topics. But the reason I mention that is I'm very aware that the readership of that newsletter is the Bristol West Club. And like many clubs in the UK, and I'm sure around the world, it's an ever increasing average age of readership. I mean, I'm 71, and I'm probably one of the younger members of the Bristol West Club these days. And so I'm also aware that even though that's a newsletter goes out as a PDF attached to an email, it has to have a reasonable size font. Otherwise, people just find it too difficult to read, or they have to expand the PDF so much that they only see a small part of a page on the screen at one time. So again, coming back to the print version of AeroModeller, I do understand that. In fact, I think at the moment, and I think under Andrew's stewardship of the magazine, there's been a real effort, and there's been a real intention to try and keep it readable to a wide range of readerships. So yeah, the print is actually the font and print is actually a bit larger than it used to be years ago. Some people have said to me, "Oh, that's a cynical thing to do because it means you don't have to put so much content in the magazine." Well, that is a point of view, but the reality of life is, at the moment, and I'm touching the table, which is wooden, very firmly here, is that at the moment we don't have a huge amount of problem filling the magazine with content. There's an incredibly, to me, impressive range of contributors who contribute either on a regular basis or on an occasional basis, and there's quite a large pool of people that applies to. So at the moment, and when Andrew handed the magazine over to me, and the first full issue, the first issue which which I'll be producing solo, is the December issue. The current November one was a joint effort between Andrew and myself. And I'm in a slightly enviable position that Andrew's managed to build up a stock of articles, which I found useful, interesting, and relevant. So for the next few months, the challenge is what you leave out rather than what you actually end up putting in. And that's a balancing act as well. Some things have to be in as soon as possible because they're topical. So things like the control line European champs, the free flight world champs, there's no point in publishing articles on those in the spring and summer of next year. We'll be into the next round of championships by then. So as those articles become available, they need to go in the magazine. And the practicalities of doing that are that the magazine is effectively, the deadline for publication is about 6 weeks before the actual, before it hits the shops, before it hits the shelves. So I mentioned earlier in this webcast that it's available in W. Smith's around about the third Thursday of the month. Now, to achieve that, it means that that the issue has to be complete and ready, and ready for the publishers by the last week of the previous month. So we can never be bang up to date in terms of having last week's or even this month's contest results, and we're never going to try and do that. But we do have to keep it balanced, and we have to keep it relevant. And part of that is how many articles can we actually get into each issue, what size are the articles, how long are they, and how they're laid out. I'm very, very fortunate to have to work with a guy called Pete, who's our graphic artist and graphic designer, and he does an absolutely brilliant job of transferring or transforming the Word documents that I send him and the JPEGs into what to me at least is a very professional and impressive looking glossy magazine that's well worth its place on the shelves of the Birch Smiths. And the font is carefully chosen, and the font size is carefully chosen. So if people are finding it difficult to read, then it's something that I certainly want to know about.
Colin, just a quick one on that, and all I would say is on that I read it on the iPad, and it is, for me, it's a lot easier sometimes just to zoom in on a few paragraphs and take it that way when I'm reading it, and that's because I wear glasses for reading. So it is easier that way. But a couple of questions, because I'm conscious here we've got a string of questions I'd like to get to you from everybody. Peter Cox asks, could you do a regular article on the goings and competitions within the flying clubs around the country? And what was quite interesting was that I pulled out one of my favorite AeroModelers is this one from 1938. And interestingly, if you can see that there, it's Club News. Yeah. And it was just relevant when I read that question, and so that's one. A couple of other questions, just to consider all of these. Jürgen was asking whether you knew the average age of the readers of the AeroModeller, which I think is quite an interesting one. And then I'll just go on to another, which is age related as well. Paul Oliver, consider some articles on regular features that might address junior modelers or potential modelers of STEM activities using aeromodeling. AeroModeller was how I got hooked into model flying as a lad back in 1973. And I think that is relevant to a lot of us now, so they're all sort of age-related questions, really, and age-related comments. Yeah.
So the average age is a good question. I asked that question at the interview I had with Alan, the publisher, and Andrew. And the honest answer is it's kind of a finger in the air answer, because one thing AeroModeller doesn't have is a detailed market survey or market research. Alan, the publisher, and Andrew sort of agreed, but they both agreed that their feel or their gut feel is that the average age is probably people in their early 60s. early to mid 60s, and it may even be a little bit higher than that. But then, as you just mentioned, Mark, it does cover a very wide range. I mean, there are youngsters reading it as well, and it needs to be relevant for those lads and girls as well. So yeah, and I find it really encouraging that there's 11 and 12-year-olds who are interested in the magazine and in a more broader sense interested in the hobby. I know there's been a lot of debate and discussion in the BMFA over the years about how to attract youngsters and juniors, and seeing there that the membership is getting steadily older. So that's an interesting challenge in itself, and it's a wider question than than simply what we put in the pages of AeroModeller. But again, we've actually had one or two mini articles in the Hangar Doors section recently on one or two 11 and 12-year-olds who won awards at BMFA level and things like that. In fact, there's one lad who I'm looking forward to meeting at the BMFA dinner who's up for an award. So yeah, it's a really interesting challenge, and it's a really good challenge to have. Is how you cover that, the whole width of that spectrum. It's one I'm very aware of, and I don't necessarily have all the answers right now.
No, I don't think any of us would expect you to turn around and say, yeah, we're absolutely going to do that next week. And I think it is about feedback. A couple of others that I can just group together here. Lee Richardson come back. He said, I know it's a cost issue, but I really miss the pull-out plans, any return of them.
Yeah.
Charlie Jeffries, renew designs to be featured. I have a Canard design froglet, see October issue, page 63, which Andrew B expressed interest in for future plan feature. So I think, the plan side of it has always been very much part of the AeroModeller.
Yeah.
And maybe that might be your offshoot into the social media side, where people can collect the plans electronically. That may be something that you start to link in. It's just a thought.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion, Mark. And it's also a slightly complicated position, because I've been made aware that AeroModeller or ADH publishers who own AeroModeller and publish it also have a plan service. There actually still is a plan service.
Right.
So that doesn't that probably doesn't get mentioned or exposed to AeroModeller as well as it should be, actually. Because I was slightly surprised when I discovered that a few months ago. I said, "Oh, really? There's still a plan service." I wasn't actually aware there was. So that's something we need to look at, certainly. And I think the digital side of that. I've also had some questions from elsewhere in recent weeks about, can we do more to make plans available in a digital format? And then people have also said, well, yeah, it's one thing to download a plan, but then I've got to scale it up. And how do I scale it up? And challenges like that. So it's an interesting one, but it's certainly one. I think Leah's raised a good point there. I think it's something we need to be given some very active thought to.
Yeah, and Nick Sotoff is just sort of expanding a little bit from your point there, and could we have a digital version, friendly free plans, either by PDF or the digital version having a grid background or key dimension on the plan? So that's something sort of thing I do every day. It's part of my job that you have to scale these things. But I think if it is possible and it doesn't clash with the plan service, that would be amazing. Couple of other questions here. I'm just conscious of keeping the questions coming to you, so you've got a flavour of them. What is the current circulation, and is it holding steady? And that's from Dave Phipps, CEO of BMFA. So he's
and that's another interesting one, because that was something I asked at the interview I had as well. So the current circulation of AeroModeller magazine, the print copy, is around about 12,000 or so, typically, per month. It's not quite that simple, though, because Alan, the publisher, who's got many years' experience of this, also pointed out that he's very well aware that a lot of those 12,000 copies get handed on to second and third people. So he actually reckons that that the realistic, practical readership is probably more like 25 to 30,000 people around the world. And in the UK, it's fairly steady, and abroad it's reasonably steady. I mean, the magazine is sold and is available in Canada, United States, Australia, New Zealand, and so on. And we still have a number of subscribers in those territories as well. But yeah, it's holding up. It's not steadily dwindling. Let's put it that way.
Good. That's good to hear.
And it's interesting, for me, it's interesting to parallel that with the situation in terms of the BMFA membership as well. I mean, I think to some extent they kind of go hand in hand.
No, very much so.
Certainly those circulation figures, Colin, that you talk about, that does suggest that it's held steady over many years, because I used to be privy to circulation figures of the magazines in the 1980s, and at that point RCM&E was by far the biggest circulating magazine. And that was circulating over 30,000 copies a month. But AeroModeller was about 8 or 10,000. I remember that number, which is very consistent with what you're saying now. I think it's probably AeroModeller's holding up because it is a respected brand, and it is global. You know, I know people abroad who subscribe to AeroModeller, and that's the kind of, like you said at the start of the presentation, it's walking into giants' boots, I think you said, wasn't it?
In the footsteps of giants, in
the footsteps of giants. You certainly are.
Absolutely. I'm very aware of that. It wasn't just a glib title. No.
John Parsons, he comments, I am a model glider flyer. I've not read AeroModeller or RCM&E for some time, and maybe articles on 3D printing have recently featured in these magazines. If not, I'm thinking of modelers could be interested in articles concerning 3D printing and model glider, power planes, etc. Use of different materials for models, and the value of 3D printers for making all sorts of accessories such as servo covers, horns, engine mounts, etc. These subjects might also appeal to younger modelers.
Yeah,
that's something that we know very well. Barry and I and Andy have run a number of articles on that, and picked up an awful lot of feedback and interest from people. I think the 3D printer sales went up. We had a spike in printer sales at one stage. So again, some new technology there, which you referred to earlier. So
that's another very good point. In fact, it's when I mentioned some of the topics that I'd like to see in it, or would like to introduce into AeroModeller, like new materials, current materials, high-tech materials, and so on. 3D printing is very much part of that, certainly. And there's already been a discussion. I won't give too much away because I don't know chance my arm too much, but there's already been a discussion with one of our contributors about doing some articles on 3D printing, and he sent me some photos of some of the items he'd 3D printed, and I was absolutely amazed. It wasn't just small plastic moldings. I mean, I understand people are now 3D printing engine crankcases, for example, which I find absolutely mind-blowing. So yeah, it's a very good point, and definitely something we need to be doing, certainly.
Yeah, Jürgen's come back with another point. I must admit, I've not read an AeroModeller for a while, but I do find information in it where to get modeling materials. Are there enough adverts in it for those materials? Again, it is this supply. It's the go-to magazine in many ways. It's that go-to magazine, I think. So it's a tough ask getting this balance right. And I think Jim Wright, he came out with a comment earlier, which is very typical of Jim, and absolutely right. I think AeroModeller can be and should be the front wheel of model flying to the public, i.e. it gets there first. people agree with that. That's the thing, and I think it probably does. But it's on a personal side to it. I put my point, and I did sort of mention this a few moments before we started. One of the negative sides that I've found with the AeroModeller, and I've subscribed to it now for almost continually, I think, since I started. But I do find the front covers not as exciting or not as memorable as they used to be. And I can pick certain AeroModelers up and know exactly what was in there just from the front cover. And I do find them, and I have found them, and I did mention it to Andrew a little while ago, but I found them a little bland. Got that one, and I picked up. Let me just get rid of that so you can.
This was a great one. 1948. They put this Gloucester Meteor on the front cover. It was a painting, but inside it was the launch issue for JetX. It was absolutely fantastic what they done.
Not good when we got our backgrounds on, but again, there was this period of the painted artwork front covers, and what's quite interesting that I won a trophy that AeroModeller had sponsored, and one of the prizes was a picture of the covers of these spectaculars. Now, I'm not suggesting for one moment you should go back to getting an artist in and decorating and doing it that way, but I do think that some of the covers are a little bit dull, and I'm just going to leave it with you. I'm not going to elaborate any further. I don't know whether others have got the same thoughts.
I think one thing that I would like to say is, in ignoring the radio control side, although there was a little bit of let's say single channel vintage radio control, a lot of good content was I don't want to say brushed under the carpet, but it wasn't brought to the table. Whereas at one time, AeroModeller wasn't particularly prejudiced against radio control. In the 1960s, 1970s, they still carried some radio control stuff. There's far more people aeromodeling in radio control than what there is in free flight and control line. So you have to be careful, in my opinion, of you ignore the radio control sphere at your peril.
I certainly take that point, Barry. I think that's a good point. Again, like a number of other topics that we've covered, touched upon, I think it's a balancing act. On the one hand, I'm very aware that RCM&E has been the de facto go-to magazine for the dedicated radio modeler for a number of decades, and rightly so. So I wouldn't suggest for a moment we would try and compete with RCM&E.
No.
On the other hand, I don't think we should ignore radio either. I covered it. One of the things I mentioned in my brief introduction was that one of the areas that AeroModeller tries to cover is RC assist. And I think that's right and proper, and I think that's got a very valid place in the magazine, and that also connects to the point about sports flyers as well, and more up to date, more modern sports designs. A lot of those will be one or two channel radio as well, inevitably, and that means they can be flown on much smaller sites too. So it plays into that challenge as well. So it's a good point, Barry, and I certainly don't turn my back or turn a blind eye to the radio side of things at all now. And I'm just amazed and astounded at what's happening with the technology in radio these days, with things like indoor scale and indoor radio models of 10 or 12 inch wingspan. It's just mind blowing, absolutely mind blowing. So good point.
Did we answer Martin Billy's questions?
I was just going to say, actually, Mark's comment about the cover brings me on to the written questions from Martin. So I think this is probably a good a good time to cover those. So there were three questions that Martin Dilly very helpfully submitted by email yesterday, which I think are all good questions and good valid points. So I'd like to cover those. The first one was, Martin said, the magazine cover is important. For the past few years, the magazine has mainly had covers featuring static shots of itty-bitty little models that make the mag embarrassing to be seen reading. can we please have covers showing people flying model aircraft? This will surely make the magazine stand out on W.H. Smith's shelves. Yeah, I think that's a valid point. And again, I think it's part of the requirement, the necessity to keep the magazine current and keep it interesting and relevant. So, yeah, I certainly will be introducing perhaps a wider variety of topics on the cover. In fact, the current one has got a small free, the November issue has the free plan on the cover, which is a small model. As part of the handover from Andrew, there was a request from a particular branch of the hobby to feature a particular individual on the cover of the next available issue, because it's somebody who's been deeply entrenched and involved in his branch of the hobby for many years, even more years than me, and is now retiring. So I thought that was particularly worthwhile and valid. So there will be an individual on the cover of the December issue. I won't give away too much by saying who it is just yet. But I think also there's been, I've had, again, very valid comments about action photos and models actually in flight on the cover. I think that's a good point. And the cover photos that are perhaps less static. So yeah, I'm certainly very open-minded about that, certainly. So that was to Martin's first question on the covers. Yeah, certainly. Hopefully you will see a bit of development in that area in the coming months. Martin's second question was, I realize that you can only print what you're sent, but as someone in touch with the contest scene, which is always where developments are, can we hope for some headhunting of contributors? I'm actually just starting to do that. So articles on some of the techniques used today, for example, team race fuel systems, F1B variable pitch props, Montreal stops, circle toe systems, bunt systems, F1C wing folding mechanisms, LDA airfoils, carbon structures, and so on. And there were some articles, and then Martin quotes some articles on those sort of subjects that were published about 20 years ago. So I think it's time to update those, certainly. So again, and it relates and connects to one of some of the points that have been made earlier in this discussion. So again, I would say absolutely yes, definitely, and I will be out there actively headhunting people to write some of these articles too. And then Martin did his third point. He says the magazine I know no longer receives all the foreign magazines, so we don't get to receive all the foreign magazines, even if there are any left that aren't all radio control. The hangar doors used to have news of overseas developments and more of a feeling of progress and less of a retro angle, a forlorn hope, ? Well, again, I think that's a valid comment, and I think it needs to be a bit of a balance. I wouldn't, I certainly wouldn't turn my back on having slightly reminiscent items in hangar doors, but certainly Martin's point about overseas developments, I think that's an interesting point. I need to give some thought as to how I go about that, because as Martin says, I don't receive any international magazines as editor of AeroModeller. I only wish I did, and that's probably because there aren't many out there these days that aren't purely dedicated to radio control. But yeah, but I think it's I think it comes under the broader umbrella of being open-minded and being open to fresh and new developments and what's happening out there. Not only in the UK and where the readership is, but worldwide as well. So as much as I can do, I'll be all for doing that, certainly.
Colin, I'm going to just pick up on a couple of comments and questions just coming through. We're obviously coming close to the end of the session, but John Minchell, is there a place for covering very lightweight indoor RC and dual free flight RC models? So again, I noticed you did a tissue covering article in the latest one, and what was interesting was that one of our regulars, Sue, she was desperate for us in the air tonight to do a session on tissue covering. We just couldn't find somebody to do it, and you got Andy to do it. So again, you know, I think those things are, again, it's nice to rejuvenate some of those,
Yeah.
fresh approach to them.
Yeah.
Obviously, it met in with the products.
There's a question I saw it in the Q&A, which I should address, because I should have explained it in more detail about subscriptions. I can't see it now, but somebody said, with a cover price of £6.99, a subscription of £130 doesn't add up. What I should have said is that the standard subscription is for 2 years. It's not 1 year, it's 2 years. That £130 or thereabouts gets you the magazine for 2 years. So it does provide a bit of a saving on the cover price on the shelf.
Thank you. Paul Wellicott, he loves the idea of showcasing clubs around the country. So that's somebody else sort of backing up that. PJ Carter, Radio Sisters, Colin has just mentioned, is, in my opinion, well suited to AeroModeller.
Yeah,
so there
I
we go.
absolutely agree. Yeah. Yeah.
David Brown, I took up AeroModeling again about 10 years ago as a last of summer wine activity. And I love my traditional low-tech CL control line sports stunt activity, which with nice oily diesels. Please don't forget us. So there you go.
Absolutely. In fact, there's going to be a feature in next month's Hangar Doors on that very activity. Actually, yeah. There will be some photos of nice smelly oily diesels and some.
We need smelly magazine. Bill Space, a reader of the Fine Organ for 50 years, and other recent contributor. It's still a thrill to rip off the covering and dive in. Long may it continue to be a physical presence. So
yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Yeah, it's a funny thing that I was interested in your comment earlier, Mark, that you often read it on an iPad. Maybe I'm a bit old-fashioned, but I like to have physical magazines.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing I personally did for practicality and storage reasons about 5 or 6 years ago was convert my Free Flight News subscription from a physical copy to a digital copy. And so these days it arrives monthly as a PDF. That has advantages, but there's something about picking up a copy of the magazine, which to me it's more tangible. and yeah, if I want to sit down and read something with my breakfast, then I'm not going to. I'm unlikely to pick up my iPad. I'm much more likely to pick up a physical magazine to read. So yeah, and I think it applies to a number of hobbies and sports. I've also got an active interest in the classic car world, and exactly the same happens in that world as well. There's an ongoing perennial debate about digital versions of classic car magazines as against print versions. Yeah. So it applies across the board in many ways. It does, but certainly for as long as I'm editor, I would fight tooth and nail to keep a print copy available. Certainly.
Brilliant. That's good to hear. Peter Becker, has AeroModeller ever had a picture of a woman designer with her winning design on the cover? To date, Sandra Hill with her Jasco special on the January 47 issue is the only one. There has been to be others. There has to be others.
That's an interesting one.
Yeah, I can think of lots of
with a winning design in the magazine. That's a really interesting challenge, actually.
Yeah. Well, there you go. There's one for you.
Yeah.
To add to the list. Phil Davis has written a lovely paragraph here, which congratulations, Colin, on becoming the editor of AeroModeller. I started reading the magazine in the mid-60s for about 10 years. I've flown indoor A1. I've flown indoor, not indoor A1. I've flown indoor, A1 gliders and half A power. Also control line stunt and combat. In the early 70s, then progressed to radio control. So I now read RCM and E. The early basic AeroModeling info I learnt from AeroModeller has stayed with me ever since. A lot of modelers I fly with now don't know the difference between wash out and wash in, or the importance of the position of the centre of gravity. I think keeping to basics so juniors understand the fundamentals would be the benefit if in later life. Good luck for the future. I think I would add to that, not just juniors. A lot of people need to remember where the centre of gravity is. It bites you if you get it wrong. So
yeah, for sure. And I guess part of the reason for that or people being less aware of things like the C or G is I suppose, and again, particularly probably more so in the radio control side of the hobby, people, I suppose, quite a large proportion of people buy ready-built models and ready-to-fly models, or almost ready-to-fly models, where they don't need to have that technical knowledge so much, or that embedded, intrinsic technical knowledge. But yeah, it's an interesting point, actually.
Well, my buddy Mike Woodhouse, who you know well, has just come back. Sue Miller was on the model aircraft cover in 1965. So there we go. We've got another.
Indeed. And to your point, Mark, about memorable covers, I can remember some of the editions of the magazine in the early 70s with Sue Hipson on the cover and people like that. So yeah. So
I think we've got 2 more points here, and then we'll start to wind up. Steve Jones, what's the view on the trend to buy models versus build? As a traditional builder from plans for 40 years since school days, ready built has its place, but what's the outlook, particularly as basic materials are ever more expensive and hard to source? I mean, that's a cracking question and point to put across.
It is a very good question. Yeah. Well, certainly from an AeroModeller point of view, AeroModeller very much kind of, I suppose, prides itself on supporting traditional methods and methodologies and values in aeromodeling. So we very much are behind people who build their own models, and of course people who design their models too. I know it's less and less the case these days in both the competition and sports side. And as a free flight competition flyer, it's been interesting for me to observe that for certainly 20 years now, there's been more and more bought models rather than people designing and building, as most of us always did. And I'm also discovering that that's equally true in other branches of the hobby. And also there's all sorts of developments going on, not just with radio, but with things like engine and motor systems and the prevalence of electric these days. I think it's a very good question. Maybe there's something to be said for going back to those old issues where people were being introduced to the hobby and there were tuition articles on what the C or G is and how you measure it and why it's important and things like airframe stresses and things like that. So yeah, that's a very good point. I'm certainly very open-minded to topics like that.
I'm gonna leave I'm bringing the last point in question up from Jim Wright, and he says, considering this point, what about a new version of Golden Wings to try and get more younger flyers involved? Also rerun some stuff from early years like the Whys and Wherefores series, April 1952. Why the aircraft flies. So that sort of segues into what we've just said, and I think Jim is one that sort of he's a fabulous exponent of this and a supporter of model flying and aero modeling in general. So I think that's incredibly relevant. And
it is, and it relates to that point we were just talking about as well. So it's a very good point.
I think we probably will stop the Q&A from that point, because I think we're at a point where you'll be brain exhausted and you'll need to have to go and lay down in a dark room soon and sort of process all of this.
And to me it's been really invaluable, and thank you to Mark and Andy and Barry for giving me the opportunity to reach out to the AeroModeller audience and even the ex-audience. So it's been really invaluable. I've got a bewildering list of notes I've made here to scribble down on a lot of the questions and the points. So there's a lot to digest there, a lot to take in, and thank you to the entire audience for your very valuable and constructive feedback, comments and suggestions. It's very much appreciated.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Colin. No, it is pleasure to have you on board, and hopefully we can get you on in a year's time or 6 months' time once you've you know, you've settled in, and you know, we can hear some of your exploits and how it all goes. We're always
Yeah, absolutely.
always welcome the AeroModeller onto here. So
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I'd look forward